Hello and welcome back to Rocket Pod. On today's show, we're joined by Simon Alexander Ong. Simon is a life coach, motivational speaker and author, and really looking forward to diving in his entrepreneurial journey and seeing what wisdom he has for us today. Simon is a world-renowned life coach, has been interviewed by the BBC, Sky and Forbes, and has also spoken or consulted with Google, Microsoft and Salesforce, so some of the biggest blue chip companies. What Simon brings is it's all about how to energize people and have them live their lives differently and really tap into their imagination. I think your book, Energize, which I'm sure we'll touch on later, is having people live the best lives and also recognize these little moments that are really special. Simon, if you would like to perhaps start with maybe some of your upbringing. Where did Simon come from? What inspired the creation of this book? Just tell us a bit about your journey and maybe some of the key people that you've met along the way that's kind of led you to where you are now.
Sure. Well, first of all, James, Harry, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. Always a pleasure to connect with like-minded individuals. So I grew up here in the United Kingdom to two Malaysian Chinese parents who had emigrated for a better life and better education. And I was one of just a handful of Chinese students in the schools that I attended from a young boy up until my teenage period. With that, there were some benefits and also drawbacks. The benefit was with a haircut like this, no one wanted to mess with me in a period of time in which Bruce Lee films were all the rage. So by default, when you looked Chinese, they automatically assumed you knew Kung Fu. So that was a huge benefit growing up as a Chinese with a haircut like this, which is all shaved for those who aren't able to see this video. And the drawback was being part of a traditional Chinese family, there was a lot of pressure on academic achievement. And so I believed mistakenly that success was defined by my job title. Be a banker, be a doctor, be a lawyer, be an accountant. Very traditional roles that were stable and paid a decent salary. And so I followed the banking route. I went to the London School of Economics. And after that, I decided to go into the world of finance at probably the worst possible time. This was 2007, a year before the global financial crisis of 2008, and at a company called Lehman Brothers, which collapsed into administration just 14 months after I started with the company.
Wow.
So a very volatile start to my career post-graduation. Now, while it was admittedly a very scary point in time in my life, because you have all these hopes, these dreams, these aspirations swept away from under your feet in a second. In hindsight, it was a beautiful blessing in disguise, because that exposure to such volatility in my career early on meant that I began the path, the longest path, if you will, that we humans make, the inches from our heads to our hearts. Never an easy one, but the most fulfilling and exciting that we will ever embark on. And so what I started to do was to ask myself questions such as, what did success mean to me? What did fulfillment look like? And what sort of impact did I want to have in the world? Simple questions, but I think questions few of us actually spend time to really dig deep into. And I realized as I was digging deep into those questions that many of us are exhausted, not because we are doing too much, but because, first of all, we're doing too little of the things that make us feel alive and bring us joy. And second is because we are running somebody else's race. In my case, I was running the race of definitions created by those around me of what success meant rather than my own definition. And that's where this journey to what I do really began. I started exploring, I embraced the mindset of a scientist to conduct experiment after experiment, to learn more about myself and deepen my wisdom and self-awareness. And that led me to coaching incredible individuals, from Michelin star chefs to TV presenters, to entrepreneurs, to business leaders in the corporate world, to speaking at some of the planet's most successful companies. And more recently, one of the positives that came out of the COVID pandemic, apart from becoming a parent for the first time, was landing a book deal. Thank you so much. Was landing a book deal with the world's largest publishing house, Penguin.
Fantastic. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
And actually, I have to say, I did actually pre-order your book, I think back in April last year. I think I'm due it soon, hopefully.
Just a few more weeks to go now, James.
Yeah, it was a long time ago. Because you've been launching for a while.
Yeah, this is one of the things I've come to understand as a debut author, that the lead time is quite long. I mean, from pen to paper, it's coming up to 2 years now.
Wow.
Since I first started writing. And then, of course, a year before, the book goes up on Amazon. And so it's available for pre-order from that time. And then now, as we're heading into the final few weeks of launch, the intensity of marketing is starting to increase a lot now.
Fantastic. So just to quickly just go back a little bit. So you mentioned from your head to your heart, and you mentioned the fact that there's these expectations that, success is defined by other people. And actually, just to share a little bit of some experience I had. So my daughter, Eva, when she was 14, nothing was really interesting her. So I thought, you know what, I'd like to send her to private school. And there was amazing private school, Ardingly College. I thought, you know what, she can board a few days a week and, she can be exposed to fencing and tennis and all these other things that weren't available at her state school. And it was a big investment for my wife and for our family. Anyway, it didn't actually work, but she did 6 months and actually it just didn't fit. But what I learned from it is that the way that it was, the school was set up, and a lot of private schools are like this, I guess, it's this, the lawyers, the accountants, the bankers, and that works for a lot of people. And they were very academic, but almost the kids were groomed, from a very, very early age to do a 12-hour academic day. Eva, she was kind of finished in 6 hours and she had never, ever missed her homework. But anyway, it didn't work. And in the end, I had to yank her out and put her back in regular school. But I think it just highlighted that expectation. And actually, even it doesn't matter what school you go to, but that the society as a whole, they do tell us what success is. But yeah, so your head to your heart, that kind of hit a nerve for me. And and actually, this is probably a conversation for another time, but I was parenting with ego, maybe, because I thought I knew what she wanted. She didn't want that. She was very unhappy and it was awful. And I was very humbling for me because it was it just didn't fit her. But actually then she shot to stardom at her regular school and it was all fine. And she doesn't hold against me. She said it was the best thing she did. But anyway, sorry to digress there. It just
But I think it is fascinating, James, that you mentioned the word ego, because when I talk about that journey from my head to our heart, really, from a practical perspective, it is that journey from ego to humility. Ego is I know it all. Ego is why me when something doesn't go your way. Ego is like this career should work out because everyone else is doing well in it. Whereas when we transition towards humility is like, who can I learn from? What lesson can I take from that experience, whether it worked out or it didn't? Humility is understanding that it is not what happens to us, but it is how we respond to what happens to us that is most important.
Yeah.
And when we make that journey, that is when I think an ocean of opportunity begins to open up for us in every area of our life.
Yeah. Interesting. And I guess, and then you talk about sort of starting to make that journey. And I think the points that you made around someone else's definition of success, I think that's a really great point there. And it's making sure to start focusing on the things that are fulfilling for you. And I think something you said before is the relationship between what is success and what is fulfillment. So I guess if you could just touch a little bit more on that really as well. So obviously we want to pick what we feel is our journey to success, but what is the comparison between success and fulfillment, really?
Definitely. So for me, there is a reason why I had two separate questions, one on success and one on fulfillment. And that is because they mean very different things. You can be successful in the eyes of others. You can be earning a lot of money. You can have the status. You can have the following. You can be working in recognized brands or companies. But if you are not happy on the inside, that isn't fulfillment. You aren't fulfilled. And so if I look at my own journey, to many people, I was successful. I was working in a recognized company. I was in an industry that paid very well. I went to one of the most prestigious universities in the country. But yet inside, I didn't feel fulfilled. And for me, when you are not fulfilled, it is usually because you are going against the things that come more naturally to you. You are denying your potential by hiding your talents. And that's why those two questions, what does success mean to me? What does fulfillment look like? Are important to sit and reflect on. And when we have uncovered the answers that we ourselves have defined, our greatest challenge is to then create a life around those answers.
Absolutely. I think that's really interesting. And I guess for someone that is on this, like you said, you're going towards that, what society wants, you're thinking, this is my route to success because it's the high paid job. So for someone that maybe is on this cycle, how do they identify that they are on that cycle, then to realize, to reflect and think, okay, what's truly going to make me fulfilled? And then how do they start that path towards a more fulfilled life?
Definitely. Well, the first step I would say to anyone who wants to understand where they are on their own path and what must be addressed is first to slow down and to raise your level of self-awareness. Because you cannot have self-development without self-awareness, because you simply can't change what you're not aware of. So when we elevate our consciousness in understanding where we are right now in this moment of our life, we give ourselves an understanding of where ground zero is today. We can have all the goals, the dreams, and the visions planned out. But if we don't know where we're operating from, where our strengths are, where our weaknesses are, who we need to get in contact with, who we need to help us, then those grand things will always remain a distant dream. And it's why one of the greatest activities we can do is simply the act of journaling, simply the act of writing down what is in our mind. It is an activity that sounds simple, but few of us have actually embraced it. One of the ladies that I actually interviewed for my book her name is Diana Chow. She's based in the US, and she launched the world's largest youth for youth nonprofit called Letters to Strangers, so otherwise known as L2S.
Okay.
And when she delivered a TED talk, she said to the audience, and for me, this was the greatest takeaway from her talk. It was a single sentence. And she said, writing is humanity distilled into ink. Writing is humanity distilled into ink. Because in the process of downloading our thoughts onto paper, it forces us to pause, to reflect, and write with intention. And in that space, it is as if you are pulling out a chair, sitting down, and having a conversation with your true self. It is space for you to understand who you really are, what you really want, and what stands in your way. And this nicely reflects back to what I said earlier about that longest journey being from our heads to our hearts, because that is how we immerse ourselves in that journey. When we raise our level of consciousness, when we deepen our awareness, that is the greatest first step, because with that knowledge comes true wisdom, but also the next step becomes clear. And that is all we need. That is all we need. We just need to know the next step. We don't need to know the next 10, 20, or 30 steps, because no one knows what's going to happen tomorrow. Mm-hmm. We just have to have clarity on what is that next step, and then find the courage to take it.
That sparks something. So it's an old fable, and it's about you may have heard of it. It's about a beggar that's sitting on a box, a poor person, and they're begging. And this stranger walked by the beggar, and they said, they didn't give them any money, but they said, look under the box. And the beggar looked under the box, and it was full of gold. And I guess the analogy is it's that we often have all the answers inside of us. They're all there. And actually something else. So over Christmas, I spent hours researching an e-inked tablet. It was a remarkable tool, and I ended up going with the books. But it was like, how can I, organize my writing? And actually, I've completely changed. You talk about journaling. I've completely changed the way that I'm working, and it goes onto my e-ink pad first, and then it gets and it's just been the whole process is different than typing. So it's really interesting. So you also mentioned slowing down, and before you joined, Simon, I had a call with Harry this morning, and I said I would actually like to ask you a little bit about quietening our lives, and I didn't say slow down, did I, Harry? But no. it was along the same themes, because quite often we're so busy, just running from one thing to the next. Can you talk a little bit about the slowing down piece and that self-awareness? It's probably, the way you described it, it is linked with that. Can you just talk about that? Touch on that?
I often say that slowing down is a superpower, especially in the world today that is increasingly distracted. And that is because if you go back decades, before the internet, before we had all this social media, when we talked about somebody's IQ, it was the knowledge that they had. So you could ask them questions such as, what happened in this year? How did this person came to power? They would be able to tell you the answers to these general knowledge questions. Now, as time has gone on and all of that information is now at our fingertips, IQ is less about what you know, but ultimately your ability to focus.
Mm-hmm.
Are you able to focus in a world in which people's attention spans are getting shorter and shorter and shorter? And this is where slowing down comes in. The very act of slowing down is actually every entrepreneurs and leaders and anyone, in fact, who is ambitious, it is their greatest challenge, because we feel as part of, again, society's definition that in order to be productive, we have to be busy. We have to be doing something.
Mm-hmm.
And in the process of always doing, we forget to simply just be. And from my experience, simply being with intention
Mm-hmm.
can actually be just as productive as the doing.
Mm-hmm.
So I will share with you a couple of anecdotes just to illustrate how powerful slowing down can be. I don't know if these are true, by the way, but I think regardless, there is a lot of wisdom in them. So the first one, Isaac Newton has his breakthrough about gravity, not from sitting in front of his desk, but by sitting underneath a tree and getting hit by an apple. Archimedes has his insight about displacement theory while lying in a bath. Eureka! He jumps out and runs naked through the street through that insight that he had. Thomas Edison, at the height of his career, would go to his local lake to fish without bait. So no one, not even the fish, would disturb him. And that would allow him to slow down, for his mind to connect the dots, inspiration to be born and insights to awaken. More recently, James Dyson of Dyson Company, who created Hoovers and hand dryers, he is often noted for shutting himself in a room with blank pieces of paper to just see what comes out of his mind through doodling and through sketching and illustration. And that's where many of his ideas were born. So again, I don't know if all of these stories are true, but they are anecdotes that many of us have come to believe, but I think there is wisdom to be had in them. It is why for us, when we go on a nice holiday to somewhere exotic, that is often when we have our creative breakthroughs. We come back full of ideas. We come back with full of motivation to want to try new things. So for me, slowing down is just as important as the doing. And when we can marry the two together, we have days in which we have periods of deep work, but also intentional rest. That is how we leverage what I call energetic flow.
I just went on a holiday, first one in 3 years. That's why I got a bit of a tan. Got to mention the tan. And actually, the day 3, it was like a fizzy soda drink. All these thoughts were bubbling up, and I was batting them away. I actually locked my phone in the drawer, which I never do. I literally just buried it. I didn't even look at any emails, nothing, which I've never done. But the thoughts came up, and I'd like bat that one, say, oh, I'll keep that one. And then I mapped out the next, 3 years, some goals, but actually they're more about me. So I think for those listeners out there that haven't taken a holiday, I think a lot of what Simon said, it's true. You have some really critical thinking.
Yeah.
And actually it did help with self-awareness. And I've actually changed a lot of my priorities as a result. That's 10 days.
Yeah.
And okay, it would have been nice if it was a bit longer, but actually 10 days was enough. So thanks for sharing with that, Simon.
My pleasure. And if I had to use an analogy, it's like every day we wash our bodies when we shower or when we take a bath. But how often do we wash our minds? Usually what we do is we still carry the baggage of yesterday, the anxiety of the future, that we're not actually in the present. And slowing down isn't just about taking a holiday, meditating and disconnecting. It's also about living in the present moment, to be absolutely engaged in what is going on around you. When one of Michael Jordan's coaches was interviewed, I don't know if you've seen the Netflix show, The Last Dance. It's a fantastic TV documentary. And it charts the rise of the Chicago Bulls basketball team during Michael Jordan's years. And one of his coaches was interviewed during this documentary and asked what made Michael different to his competitors and his colleagues that made Michael Jordan. And he said, well, it wasn't because Michael was taller than anybody. Most basketball players are tall anyway. It wasn't that he was harder working. Everybody worked hard on the court. And it wasn't that he was faster than anyone. His secret power was that he was absolutely present in every game that he played. When asked if he would make the next shot, he would often say, I don't know, because I'm concentrated on the present one. He forgot about the last shot. He didn't know what would happen on the next shot. He was absolutely present in that moment. And when we look at many of our lives, we are hurtling towards a tragic scenario. So many of us are very quickly hurtling towards this tragic scenario of living as if we're never going to die, and then dying having never really lived.
Oh, wow.
And that is because we're neither in the future, we're neither in the present, we're neither in the past, but because we're nowhere, we don't get to enjoy the moments of wonder in this very second.
Yeah, I think that's an amazing point, and I love that quote there. And I think that slowing down and being present is what everybody seems to be missing. They're always sort of hurtling towards that constant goal that then you may reach, and it keeps pushing, and you just keep going and going and going. And like you say, you'll eventually get to that point where your time is up, and you're thinking, well, I've just been running towards this goal. And the amount of people I've found that have got there, and then they've really thought, oh, that wasn't quite what I expected. But they've spent that last 10 years just hurtling towards this, not enjoying those 10 years. And now they're 10 years older and sort of thinking, well, where was exactly what you said there? They weren't present in that journey. So
exactly. And I think when I talk about energy, this is exactly it, is people may say, I spent the weekend with my family, or I went on a date with my partner last night for 2 hours. Well, my question to them is, the time is great, but how much energy did they have of you in that weekend and those 2 hours?
Yeah,
that is most important, because the greatest gift that we can give other people is simply the gift of our presence and energy. That when we are speaking to them, when we are with them, we are with them. We are there in that moment, because that quality time, that is what people remember. It's that they've been listened to, they've been supported, and there is a space in which you are sharing with them. Think how it feels if you are in a conversation and the person that you are speaking to is on and off looking at their phone. How would that make you feel?
You know what? So I have 3 teenage daughters, a 14-year-old, a 16-year-old, and my eldest is now turned 18. So I guess, I guess she's an adult now, or a young adult. And I think, entrepreneurship, there's always cost to, however we choose to, I guess, conduct our lives. It's huge cost to be an entrepreneur with a family. And I think actually makes me feel quite emotional, actually. I think some of the failures of the parent is that I've been there physically, but mentally I've been somewhere else. And it's been, I'm now aware of it, but I wasn't aware of it, it's just that present moment is so powerful, and so important. And, it's like, it's right in front of you. It sounds so simple, but yet we're all, I can't speak for anyone else, but, we do have a lot of distractions, and what's really important, and it's, a lot of the people that our family and our friends that we maybe neglect a little bit. But anyway, they tell me I'm a great dad, but I could just see, but it's a wake up call. I've had a wake up call recently, and I don't, and I've still got time.
Well, James, I think the very fact that you're aware of it is incredible. And I resonate with a lot of what you share, because I became a parent for the first time, as you know, during COVID. Our daughter is nearly 2 now.
Wow.
And people have often asked me, Simon, that must be a lot for you to manage, being an entrepreneur as well. And I'm curious, how has that impacted your productivity? And I admitted that, yes, obviously things have had to change in terms of how I manage my diary and my schedule. But actually, it has made me unexpectedly more productive than I was before I was a parent. And I say to them, here's why. Because before I was a parent, I could be working all the hours in the day. And that is not good for our health. It can exhaust us. It can make us tired. Now I've got a child. I know that between X and Y during the day, she is going to be at nursery. And when she comes home, I want to be present with her. So knowing that I've only got that window to get work done, it actually challenges me to question what my priorities are. If I can only get 3 things done in the next 6 or 7 hours, what would those three things be that would move me forward the most?
Mm.
And once I've got that done, when I spend time with my family and my daughter, I don't feel guilty.
And you're more energized.
So actually, indeed, I'm more energized,
Yeah.
and it actually gets me focused. And I think this is the idea of having a deadline. When you have a deadline and a limited time, it actually increases your productivity, because now you know the constraints you're working with. When there are no constraints, we tend to procrastinate, and we end up doing it right at the 11th hour in order to get it over the line.
Yeah, no, it's really wonderful having this conversation. But, you know, being present is so important, you know, and if I can save someone, you know, the same mistake. I mean, you know, we're all human, and actually that's what makes us, I guess, beautiful in a sense, is that we're all imperfect. But I think just being aware and actually I love the time constraint thing, because it's the 80-20 rule, isn't it? Pareto's law. You know, what's going to give you 80% of the results with 20%, or, you know, so that prioritization. But, you know, to your point, if you're aware, then you're going to be more focused on actually what is important, what is going to move the needle. And you can't do everything, let's face it. You know, you might so as far as how do you operate, so goals and list writing, and do you have any tips around, I mean, there's these never ending to-dos, you're never going to get them all done. How do you conduct your business? Do you write lists? Do you set out, is it desired business out or desired outcomes? Is it a journey? Can you give any insight?
Sure. So if I work from the vision first, so what I have is I set a bold vision, which has no time scope around it. That's sort of a very long-term thing.
It's like an outcome, desired outcome.
Exactly. So how do I want to be remembered, for example? So I'm looking at my lifetime as a whole. So when I pass from this world, how do I want to be remembered? Which I think is a great exercise to do. And so I just plot out all the things I want to be remembered for. And then I work backwards. I go, well, in order to be remembered for these things, what do I want to do with my life? And that's where the goals start to come out. So then I come up with a series of goals, and then I work backwards again. Looking at this year, if I just look at the first 90 days, so I do it by 90-day sprints. If I look at the first 90 days, what areas would be most important for me to focus on in this section to help me move forward? So for example, in the first 90 days of 2022, clearly one of the most important themes is my book. So that would dictate a lot more of what I do day to day and week to week than, say, the second quarter of this year, when my book has already been published. And then I just create a series of points that I need to address. And as I plan each week and day, I will refer to that and pull out a couple of points to address each day, knowing that I can't do everything. And I think this is where we fall into the trap when we do to-do lists. We write a to-do list, and then we keep adding and adding and adding and adding to it that actually we never get to tick them off. But if we just put a couple of points on and say to ourselves, well, if I finish those couple of points ahead of time, then maybe I'll go and have a look at other points that I can address. Otherwise, I would just step back, enjoy the rest of the day, have some downtime, catch up with some reading, and do other things that will help me improve as a person.
So when you pick a point, do you then break it down into steps within that point?
So the points I'm talking about are themselves steps. So I'll give an example. So one of my points could be reach out to this company to discuss speaking around my book in a fireside chat. So that could be one point. And I might say, well, I'm due to catch up with this person on Thursday, so I'm going to drop that into the Thursday slot, because then I can raise that with them. Nice. So these points are all action-based. And that is key for me, is that when you have your series of points, make them action-based and specific, because often we write them at a very high level that when we actually start to do them, we're like, wow, that's a lot more work than I realized. So a point that many of us would write down is write that article. Now that is very high level. If the article could be as long as 4,000 words or as short as 600 words, but depending on the length, you've then got to do the research. You've then got to sketch out the structure of the article. You then got to actually write the thing, get it edited. And so you want to break it down to very small action points that then you can go, okay, Monday, I'm going to do the research I need to get the article done. Once I've done that, then maybe by Thursday, I would then start laying out the structure. So then I can tick that off because it's very specific and I know what I've got to do.
Okay.
The reason we put off things on our to-do list is because it can seem overwhelming. Write that article sounds a lot more overwhelming than simply research a few sources for the article.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we break it down to very simple mini steps, it becomes more motivating to tick them off and get them followed through with.
I think this would be a good segue to introduce our sponsor, Flexi. I'd like to take a moment to introduce you to our amazing sponsor, Flexi. These days, we have multiple subscriptions from streaming services to gift boxes and much more. Discover Flexi's unique subscription marketplace, sourced from independent British brands, from organic beauty products, cocktail kits, and responsibly sourced coffee to plant-based meals, gift boxes, and much more. Whatever your passion, look forward to a regular box of joy delivered straight to your door. All easy to pause, cancel, or resume in a tap or two from one single dashboard. So give Flexi a try. It's free to download from the App Store, or head over to www.flexyapp.uk. That's FLEXYAPP.uk. Now, back to our guest.
Do you ever prioritize the items via the amount of energy you have? So like writing an article would require maybe quite a lot of mental capacity to actually be creative, whereas, writing an email, might not require as much energy. So as far as this energy piece, do you pick, I guess maybe that's just common sense. I don't know, but
definitely. Well, if I sort of loop back to self-awareness, and we all have different energy levels. So what I do is I simply listen to my own energy levels. So for many of us, we tend to have our highest energy first thing in the morning. As we go through the day, naturally, our energy levels will start to drop after lunch and into the evening. So if that is your energy profile, again, we're all different. Some people energy kicks up in the evening, and I guess we call them night owls. But if your energy profile follows the first, i.e. high in the morning, starts to decline as the day goes on, then that gives you the insight that if you are going to do something that is going to require the most energy, you do that first thing in the morning. But in order to leverage that high energy period, you must plan your day the night before.
Okay.
You must plan your day the night before, because planning your day takes little energy. You've just got to sit down and say, okay, how will I know that the next day will have been productive? And then you lay out your priorities so that when the next day starts, you can get stuck in straight away with the item that requires the most energy, rather than leaking away your energy to things that actually don't need your energy right now. So most of us actually whip out our smartphone first thing in the morning. We go through emails, we look at news, we look through social media, news feeds, and then our energy is already all sapped before we've even done the very task that needs our energy. And so that's why we put off the task till later in the day, and then tomorrow, next month, next year, maybe never.
Yeah, some incredible points that I'm actually I've made a note to action straight after this. I think that I've got that endless to-do list that it's constantly just adding on and on and on. And I think, like you say, pull that one point. And I even thought about individual small breakdown tasks. So if the goal is to, I don't know, like you say, reach out to someone, it's instead of just that as the big goal, it's breaking that down into do a little bit of research and then set all those sort of things, which I think makes it more achievable. And you've got that satisfaction of maybe ticking it off as well, which a lot of people do like still.
Definitely. And here's another thought, a bit left field to consider, and something I embrace. We've spoken about a to-do list. Here's something to think about. How about a not to-do list? So with a not to-do list, you write down, and you don't need a lot because you want to be able to remember them. A not to-do list is around 8 to 10 activities that you commit to not doing, because what I've realized is that to make meaningful progress in any area of our life, often it's not about doing more, but it's about stopping the behaviors that are holding us back, giving ourselves the space for what is most important. So to give you an example, for me, I have on my not to-do list at the moment, given my circumstance, work on weekends. So work on weekends is a not to-do list. If something causes that to change, I would only do it in the evening when my child is asleep. So I would catch up on that in the evening, but otherwise it's on my not to do list. So you can have a think now, well, what are the things that I can have on my not to do list that would give me the space to actually focus on what is most important? And there's a great story of a client I have in which she created her own not to do list. And one of those items helped her to perform even better at work. And I remember following up on this. It came from an article in which she was reviewed as one of the best performing fund managers of the previous year. And I said to her, I'm curious, what changed? I mean, you were already doing fairly well in terms of your performance and your return in the prior years, but specifically in the last year, you've outperformed the competition. I'm curious, what changed, if anything changed, in how you approach work? And she said, well, Simon, it was becoming a mother. Because when I put together that not to do list, one of those items was, I am not going to be in the office after 5 p.m. Whereas before, I would stay in the office late to review that decision. Should I invest in that company? Should I take out some investment in that stock? Now that I had a child, I was a mother, and I said, I'm not going to be in the office after 5. It meant with that shorter time, I had to be more decisive. I trusted myself more. And it goes back to what I shared about being more productive, becoming a parent. Now you have a fixed deadline. You have a time frame. Suddenly it forces you to be more decisive, but also trust your gut more.
I think yeah, thank you, Simon. I think not looking at your phone first thing in the morning is a good one. That's a good not to do.
Or before you go to bed. I think
I'm
that's
gonna add
another
that.
one. Yeah. And I think that also that social media thing, like one thing that I think that the not to do list one is an interesting one, because you sort of have your things you're going to do, but there's things that are interfering, like social media for one, and all of these different things that sort of end up creeping in, and you don't actively think that that's influencing sort of your day-to-day and your productivity and that sort of thing. And actually, one thing I wanted to quickly jump back to a little bit is you mentioned journaling a little while back, and it's something that I started doing it on and off. I want to be more sort of religious, consistent with it. But for those that maybe look to get into journaling, what are the sort of the points that you're trying to draw out of your head onto this paper during this 10-minute, 15-minute session in the morning or evening? If you could just go into that, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. So the first thing to say about journaling is there's no right or wrong way. We all operate differently. Some of us, we need prompts. Some of us, we just write down whatever's in our minds. Some of us will write a few lines. Some will write pages. So the first thing is not to have undue pressure on doing journaling a certain way. And if you've not done it before, what can help is simply putting together a few questions that you can use as prompts. And over time, you will have your own prompts. So when I first started, I simply Googled journaling questions, and there were so many resources online. So I would just pick a series of questions that I found on Google, and I would reflect on those questions each day and week. And over time, I just end up journaling in my own way. And that's sort of taking lessons I've learned from other people who journal really well, from TED Talks to YouTube videos to seminars I've been on. And I take what resonates with me and blend it into my own approach. So I think with regards to journaling, like with any habit, start small. Many of us complain about time. Ultimately, you know that if it means something to you, you will make the time for it. But just to hedge against that, just give yourself 5 minutes to write whatever comes to your mind. If you need prompts, Google some prompts, but just 5 minutes. We can all spend 5 minutes, even if it's on your commute, even if it's just before you go to bed, 5 minutes just to write down what is on your mind. And I promise you that when you start embracing that habit, your mind will feel a lot emptier and more focused.
So what would you say if there was one habit that you've picked up in the last 5 years, Simon, what's your number one habit that you've implemented into your life let's just say 5 years? I mean, maybe that's too long, but I thought,
well, if I talk about a habit that has helped me the most in my entrepreneurial career, from being an employee to an entrepreneur, I'm going to share two. One is personal habit, and the second is a professional habit. Okay. So the personal habit is exercise. It's as simple as that, because when I was in the corporate world, in the financial industry, as you can imagine, it was very long hours, a lot of client entertainment. And because of that lifestyle, I was eating junk. I was eating takeaway food. I wasn't exercising. In fact, the only thing I was exercising was my arm knocking back beer bottles and shots. And so that was a very unhealthy lifestyle. So when I transitioned out of that, I began to address the physical aspects of my health. And so I started to get more rest. I moved my body more. And this is where exercise came in. When I started to move my body more, it started to influence every other aspect of my health. I ate better. I slept better. I was more aware about what was sapping me of energy and giving me energy. And what I came to realize, as many of us do, is you may not always want to go for a workout today, but I guarantee that once you've done it, you never regret it. Yeah. Because the feeling that you get after, the endorphins that are rushing through your body, puts your mind in a state that is ready to take on whatever challenges the day may throw your way. So for me, a personal habit is daily exercise. Again, no matter how small, even just a jog around the block outside constitutes as exercise. But you just have to be consistent with it to see the results.
Yeah.
The professional habit that has had the greatest impact on my journey to date has been expanding my network and nurturing it every single week. So every week I'm looking for ways to connect with new people, to see how I can add value to them, how I can create new partnerships, how I can learn from one another. And that has been the greatest habit, I think, from a professional perspective. It has meant that I have been able to get endorsements for my book from the likes of Simon Sinek, Marie Forleo, Keith Ferrazzi, some New York Times bestselling authors. I've been able to partner with Andrea McLean for events this year, Andrea McLean being the former host of ITV's Loose Women. And all of that has come from being proactive about building relationships. You know, in the business world, people talk about, is it more what you know or who you know? For me, it's both. If you have a great product and a service, but people don't know about it, then you're just going to have a hobby. If people know about you, but you've got a rubbish product and service, people will very quickly find out. But if you've got a great product or service and you're great at building a network and cultivating relationships, you've got a fantastic foundation to grow from.
That's excellent. Thank you for sharing that.
I also think that point about consistency as well is so key to all of these habits you're mentioning. Is like, if you don't, and also a lot pulling in that word presence as well. If you're present when you're writing your journal, you're thinking about it, you take that 5 minutes and you do it properly, then it will feel, over the period of time when you consistently do it, you'll really start to feel the effects of this new habit. Whereas if you sort of quickly grab the book, write it down, onto the next thing, you're just going, maybe a quick 5 minute. And then if you're doing these things properly and you're present with them, then you really will start to see the effects and the positive impacts on your life.
And I guess the other thing that kind of springs to mind is that, you know, Rome wasn't built in a day. So, you know, if you can implement one good habit or one not to do list, or, you've got your whole, well, I guess we don't know how long we've got in life, but it's a journey, isn't it? So it's just recognizing the little things, these little habits. There's a book called The Slight Edge by Jeff Olson. Have you read that, Simon?
I've not, but I'm going to add it to my reading list now.
Yeah. So the first one I read was a guy called Darren Hardy, called The Compound Effect.
Yeah.
But then I found out that Darren Hardy's mentor was Jeff Olson. So I read Darren Hardy's book first, and it's basically was talking about the things that are easy to do, but also easy not to do. So like, if you between a Snicker and an apple, they're both easy decisions, but and it's like there's the compound effect and the habits, and I really like that.
Definitely. And I think if we break it down to very simple steps, even if, and here's just to put in perspective, even if you only do one thing a day that will move you forward, so no more, even just one thing in a year, that is 365 steps forward. Imagine where you could be. And that's it. We'll just talk about one thing here. Now, of course, if you do more than one thing a day, you'll go quicker, but just one thing a day is 365 steps forward. And that's what we forget. That's what we forget, is that consistency always beats intensity. Consistency always beats intensity. And so even if it's just one step going forward, that's going to compound over time.
Yeah. And if you're self-aware and you're in the moment, then the thing that you decide to do is going to be the one that's going to give you the biggest benefit. So you're focusing on that 20% that's going to give you all the, that's going to give you the 80%. So, and that's where that mindfulness comes in, and that's why it's good to slow down, because it all helps. Actually, one so just quickly, so one habit that I picked up from Darren Hardy's book was reading 10 pages of a non-fiction book every day. And I've done that. So I put that in place in 2010, and I've fallen off the wagon a few times, but pretty much I've done that. And it's changed my life. That's just one thing. Yeah. So anyway, just thought I'd share it with our listeners. I recommend it.
Totally. And I think what can help, actually, when we talk about habits, deep down, we all know what are the habits we must embrace and the habits we need to do less of. But I think in order to make that easier for us, we have to reframe what we associate as pain and pleasure. So, for example, if we associate eating a McDonald's meal as pleasure and eating something healthy as pain, then of course, our default thinking when we need something to eat would be the junk food. But if we reframe that association and connect the junk food with pain and the healthier plate of food with pleasure, suddenly we rewire the way our brain works and sees the options that are presented in front of us.
I mean, yeah, it's such a great way of thinking about it. Yeah, it's definitely a lot to reflect on. And actually, on the topic of books, we are running out of time, but I'd love you to quickly just share with our audience what you've got, about your book, and that's going to be releasing very soon. So just tell us a quick bit about that, maybe a quick summary of what it's all about, and where obviously people can start to pre-order and buy the book.
Perfect. Thank you so much for the opportunity. The book is called Energize, and it will be released at the end of April here in the UK. And you can pre-order it now at getenergizebook.com. That is Energize with a Z. So getenergizebook.com. And really what I speak about in that book is that we can transform the way we live and work by transforming our energy. Now, when I talk about energy, I'm talking about it from a physical, a mental, an emotional, and a spiritual perspective. Because what we come to realize is that energy is everything. I mean, in religion, they call it spirit. In science, they call it energy. In the streets, they call it vibes. Whatever we're talking about, we're regarding the very same thing. And when we can start to awaken, nurture, protect, and supercharge our very own life force of energy, we begin to rip open that hero potential that awaits us within.
What an excellent summary.
Yep.
I can't wait to read it.
Amazing. Well, we're actually looking at the time. We have already hit an hour now, so we do need to start thinking about wrapping up. But a few just final things, I guess. We like to leave one sort of final piece of advice for our listeners, whether it's pulling in something you've learned or whether it's something from the book or something we've even discussed today. What would be some sort of final message you would leave to our listeners following today's chat?
Sure. Well, I think a great final message would be a lesson that I learned back when I was 19 years old. When I was 19 years old, I remember being called into the headmaster's office at school, which is never a good thing, because whenever that happens, typically it's because of bad behavior or you've been in trouble in some way. I went to his office and I remember he saying to me, "Simon, I want you to take the rest of the week off school." And he followed up by saying, "Your mum has unfortunately slipped into a coma and we don't know if she's going to make it. A tragic accident happened and your dad is waiting outside to take you to the hospital." So I went along there with my brother, and a few days later, she unfortunately didn't make it. So just before her 50th birthday, she passed. And very unexpectedly, we were arranging her funeral arrangements in the weeks following. Wow. Now, as you can imagine, as a 19-year-old, that teaches you a lot of life lessons in a very short space of time. But the one that has stuck with me since then has been two words that I want to leave this show on. And those two words are don't wait. Don't wait. When we begin to fully embrace those two words, it becomes our greatest antidote to regret and sets us on the path towards our own fulfillment. Don't wait.
Thank you for sharing that, Simon.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, lots to think about there. And I guess just one final thing from me for our listeners that do want to follow your journey, whether it be social media or even coaching, where can they find you, whether that be online, offline?
Sure. So you can head over to my website, simonalexanderong.com. Or if you're on social media, the two platforms I am most active on is LinkedIn and Instagram. My handle on Instagram is at Simon Alexander O.
Perfect.
Fantastic. And is there I know obviously your book is great, fantastic. We can't wait to read it, but is there a book that you'd recommend our listeners to pick up? Any book that's made an impact on you and your journey?
Sure. So I get asked this question a lot, and the three that always come top of my mind are, firstly, The Go-Giver by Bob Berg and John David Mann.
Okay.
An incredible book. If you're anything like me, you'll finish it in one sitting because it's not a long book. It's a short book, but it's around a parable with some principles within the story. The second book is by the author Brianna Wiest. She writes some incredible things, and the book is The Mountain Is You. Every time I read her work, whether it's on Instagram or through her books, it's almost as if her words are speaking to my soul. And the third one is actually two books, but they're part of the same title because it's volume 1 and volume 2. And it is called The Teachings of Billionaire Yen Zhu by the author Colin Turner. And the reason I like that book is not just because of my Eastern background, but because it's written in a very unique way. So each chapter begins with a Eastern parable, Eastern story, and then the rest of the chapter extracts the lessons through bullet point format. So you can easily pick up the book, flip to any page and land on something profound. So those would be my 3 book recommendations.
Fantastic. And I got one final question. If you were to have a coffee with anybody, who would that coffee be with?
Dead or alive?
Well, let's just say living, because then we've got a chance. If we find an opportunity, we might, No,
Sure. If it's living, it would certainly be with Nick Vujicic. I'm not sure if you come across his work, but when he was born, he was born basically without any limbs. And when the nurses gave him to his parents didn't want to hold him when he was first born. And it took him a lot of courage to be able to live in a world in which he was constantly bullied in the schools that he went to, simply because he had no limbs and needed extra support. But what he has gone through since then has been nothing short of incredible. To share his story with the world, to write countless books, to start foundations. He's now married, has a number of children in his family. I mean, when you think of the beginnings that he started with, if I want to have coffee with anyone, it would first be him, because he knows what it is like to experience true pain, but also how to respond in a world in which it cannot always be kind to you in the way you may expect.
Fantastic. Let's wrap it up there. Great. It's been great to have you on, Simon. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks so much,
Perfect.
James,
very insightful.
Harry,
Informative.
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Rocket Pod with Simon Alexander Ong. Boy, did he have some fantastic life tips for us to be more productive and happy, fulfilled. When you get a moment, if you loved our talk with Simon, please head over to Apple Podcasts or Spotify and leave a quick review. We love all your messages. It helps guide us for our future guests, but also helps us get exposure to inspire and share more stories with our listeners and new listeners as well as we grow. A couple of key takeaways that I absolutely loved from Simon today. One is, be really intentional, whether, be present, ask ourselves how much energy are we giving to our family and friends, the folks that really matter, or even any situation. It could be a business situation. Let's not be distracted on our phones, full attention, full focus, really be in the present, really work on that. I think that's really, really good advice. On a higher level note, how do we want to be remembered? Start with the end in mind. That will help frame our entire life, how we conduct our days, our business, and our time with family and friends. Almost, how do we want to be remembered? That's quite profound, really, because quite often we're on a busy hamster wheel and never actually achieve the things that are really important, even though they're right in front of us. And a practical tip at the end, he suggested that we create a not-to-do list. These not-to-do lists could be anything from working the weekend if you have a family, scrolling mindlessly on your phone in bed. It's going to be very personal to you, but Simon was talking about, if we have 8 to 10 not-to-dos, it just gives us more space to focus on the things that really matter, which again, we can all start implementing those things. Never heard of that, so I really like that. Without further ado, quick thank you to our sponsor Flexi. This is a single destination where you can find emerging direct-to-consumer brands, whether it's non-alcoholic beers, wines, soaps, vegan pies,
all of these run by, entrepreneurs across the country and can be delivered to your door and kind of fit these replenishments around your lifestyle through a single dashboard. Flexi, you can find Flexi at flexiapp.uk. That's flexyapp.uk. Have an amazing week ahead, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time, or hearing you, or sharing stories next time. Take care. Bye-bye.